Okay, so in this video I'm going to try to go over on the probabilities of the Big Bang of being one way or the other. Now, I think the most important thing that I need to make most obvious is there's going to be two sides of the story. So one side of the story is going to be 100% true without fallacy. So if one side of the story is going to be 100% true, that means that nothing can ever disprove it. That's what it means when it's 100% true, is nothing can ever disprove anything against that correlation or magnitude to the extent of, because it's 100%. It's 100% one way or the other. And on another aspect of it is it's either 100% one way or 100% not one way. So it's either 100% true or 100% false. So we can automatically start off by understanding that one way of perceiving this answer is going to be 100% incorrect. It's never going to make sense. Nothing is ever going to be able to validate one side or the other. So we already have the answers. All we need to do now is use probability to dictate which side is the side that makes sense or which side is the side that doesn't make sense. Because that, in general, is going to lead us to what the answer must be. So, if one side is always going to make 100% make sense, and one side is never going to make any sense, now we need to take into context in our probabilities of, well, what are those options? What is... We don't know what's going to be the side that makes sense, and we don't know what's going to be the side that doesn't make sense. So we don't look at it like, well, what makes sense and what doesn't. That's not what we're going to look at right away. What we're going to look at is, well, what are the potential solutions? So when we look at the potential solutions, and then we can start to further dictate, well, what makes sense or what doesn't make sense. So what are the potential answers? There are only two answers when we're looking at the Big Bang. One is everything was expected and everything was under control. Or the second probability that we can expect or conclude to be either the right or wrong answer is that nothing was expected and nobody did anything. So those are our two options. Now it's our job to use mathematical probability to align, well, what mathematical probability links one answer to what's right or links one answer to what's wrong. So those are our probabilities. Those are our only options. So our only options are everything was expected and somebody did everything, or nothing was expected and nobody did anything. Now, right off the bat, I automatically notice, like, okay, this is like it almost solves itself. It's like, it's a no-brainer. It's almost like looking like somebody asking you a question to the extent of, well, what's an apple tree and what's an orange tree? And then it's like, all you gotta look for is, well, which tree has the apple or which tree has the orange? And all you gotta do is just, well, that has the orange, so we know that's the orange tree. Oh, well, that's the apple tree because it has the apple. This is the same thing. It's like, okay, well, if it has an apple on it, then we know that that's the apple tree. So my argument is this. Okay, So we already know that it's one of two answers, that everything has to be expected and someone or something had to have done everything, or nobody had to do anything and nothing did anything. It was nothing. Okay. So automatically, remember, one answer is going to make 100% sense, and it's always going to be able to always be validated and be able to make more sense. Whereas the other side is never going to be able to be validated or never going to be able to make sense. And you can call me biased, but I've already stated, I'm using mathematical probability to dictate and facilitate my answer. So it's not like I'm just using a random guess and then I'm banking everything off, it's just a total shot in the dark. It's based on mathematical probability. It's based on the probability, the only probability we have to have any sort of consensus of correlation of. Okay, so remember, if one of these answers is 100% right and one of these answers is 100% wrong, then it should be very, very simple to notice that something on one side or the other makes sense or doesn't make sense. So now we really need to start being honest with ourselves and taking a step back without any sort of bias, not being biased, basing on what we want it to be. So that's the biggest thing that I try to explain to everybody is my probability isn't based on what I want it to be. I don't just circle an answer because I want it to be like that. I'm dictating hey, I've looked at the mathematics, I've looked at the probability, and it's based on what makes sense and what doesn't make sense. Okay, it's not relative to what I want it to be, which is what most people correlate their ideas and theories back onto. Everything is based on what they want it to be. Well, you can't just perceive it in a way the way you want it to be, because we have to be honest on, the only thing that matters is the way that it is. So we just take the firmest foundation of concept based on what it is or what it is not. Alright, so I'm not just choking the chicken saying, I want it to be like that, I want it to fucking be like that. To where I see a lot of people that they're just I want it to be like that, but they're not gonna say it, they're not gonna make it obvious that they're saying that they want it to be like that. They're just kind of sugarcoating it, and they're not even realizing that they're making it out like that. So in my argument, it already it's like a no-brainer. Everything has to be expected. Here, before I even go into other side explanations on that, I'm gonna bring to the plate, one of the biggest things that supports this ideology, this probabilistic reality and answer. First of all, when we conclude that everything has to be expected, so when we're looking that one side everything has to be expected, the other side nothing has to be expected. Now what you want to do is you want to look at what is expected and what is not expected. So in reality, you should be kind of more drawn to anything and everything that has any correlation to an expectancy. Alright? So if you start noticing that normality and that nature of, oh, it's expected, then we should dictate, okay, well then there must be that reason why it's expected. So that's what I argue of why the universe is like that. When you look at the universe, everything is expected because it's balanced down to the razor's edge. As far as what it looks like, that's what it looks like. We don't necessarily know or don't know like what the truth of the matter is or the magnitude of the extent is, because that's not relative. That don't matter. What matters is understanding, well, why would it need to be expected, or why would it not need to be expected? So every time we keep looking further and further into, well, why does it need to be expected? It just, all that we know of is that it has to be expected. We don't know why it has to be expected. We don't know. We don't necessarily know why. And that's what I think the bigger problem of the question is like, well, why does it have to be expected? But the nature is that it has to be expected, because that's the anthropic principle, is where everything always has to be there. It has to be there. It has to be there. It has to be there. And my conclusion, it's a biased conclusion, and it's also based off of, concluding my own answer. So there's no way to know if it's right or wrong, but there's no way to know which side is actually truly right or wrong, because you can only take an educated guess, and you can only technically have a hypothesis of what the answer could or could not be. So it's always going to be a hypothesis. There's no way until we know, because that's our nature. Is when we know of certain things, then we know of certain things, and then it's no longer a hypothesis. So it's always going to be a hypothesis towards either side or the other. So everything has to be there. So automatically we should be getting credit where credit is due, because that's where our credit is due. That's due. It deserves credit to dictate, like, okay, that's our nature, to where it has to be expected. It has to be expected because we've already seen that everything is like that. So once we've already seen that everything is like that, and that's where the other side of the battle tries to conclude their answers, is because everything is like that. They think that, oh, well, we know that everything is like a certain way, that now we have the answer, but at the same time, they aren't even concluding what something actually is, to an extent of what it actually is or is not, because it's only relative to their own hypothesis, their own theory, their own opinion. So they basically try to say that, hey, that my opinion's right because everything about my opinion makes sense. But at the same time, they're the only ones who are able to make sense of their opinion, and then that's the only thing that validates their hypothesis for them, is based on if they decide, hey, this is acceptable or not acceptable. But at the same time, just because they find something to be acceptable doesn't mean that in reality it's even acceptable. So it's kind of like, seeing imaginary things. It's like, just because they see imaginary things, they believe, like, well, you think it's imaginary, but the truth is it's not imaginary. But how many times have we heard somebody try to go off of the gambler's fallacy, trying to say that they think that something's there, and then in reality it's not even there? Because that's the gambler's fallacy. When people, they have these crazy delusions going on in their head that they think shit's there, and then it's not even fucking there. So how do we know that they're not having some sort of gambler's fallacy going on, which I conclude is the actual reality of the matter, is the gambler's fallacy. Just because they hallucinate and they imagine that something's there, and they say that it's there, that doesn't make it, that doesn't mean that it's there, or that doesn't mean that it's going to be there, because they feel like they're rolling the dice, like, oh, I know it's gonna be there, watch this, and then they throw the dice. They're like, it's there, see, it's there, I just rolled the dice, and it's there, it happened, because I knew it, and I told you it was gonna happen. And who in their right mind is gonna be able to just know what the dice are gonna roll on if somebody randomly just shakes it up and throws it? And then they just have the right all of a sudden to say, oh, I knew that was there. I knew that was the way it was. I knew that's what the dice was going to be on. What does that sound like? It sounds like the gambler's fallacy. It's when somebody has this crazy idea where they think they are right, and they're not even actually right. So it's a part of our nature for people to come at people like that, to think that they're right, but they're not even right. And then they're wondering why we discredit, and then we're saying, well, there's a very high probabilistic chance you're not even correct. And then they get all mad, and they're like, you can't say I'm wrong. You can't say I'm not right. And they're like, look at how those dice landed. I told you those dice were going to land like that. See, those are the ones who are the most wrong. The ones who try to tell you that they know that, oh, I know that those dice landed like that. And then every time the dice keep rolling, it's something else. It's something else. It's something else. But then they ignore every time they were wrong and they missed. And that doesn't matter. It don't matter if they're wrong. It don't matter if they miss. It don't matter if they made a mistake, because it's not the gambler's fallacy. I'm not saying that I'm right, even though I know that I'm wrong, or that I'm wrong. It's the gambler's fallacy. I am sorry. I am very sorry to say that, and I'm not trying to, make anybody feel bad, but it's the truth of the matter. It's a near miss, and that's what drives people deeper and deeper into the gambler's fallacy of thinking that they're right about something when they're actually wrong. Okay, the gambler's fallacy, the near miss. Because they get so close. They get so close. And then that's what they're basically relying off. Did you see how close I was? And then they may have just tried to say, hey, well, it was going to be one way, but they're like, oh, well, it was so close that it was still the way that I said that it was, because did you see how close it was? It was that close. It don't matter how close it was. Any amount of closeness is still infinite amounts off. Alright, so that's what they feel. They feel like, oh, I'm so close. I'm so close. I'm so close, and that's what makes me right. And you know what? As long as I know that I'm as close as I am, then I'm right. And I'm always going to be right because I'm so close. And that's the problem. That's the problem. It's the gambler's fallacy. You cannot know what you don't know. So, only somebody who's delusional by the gambler's fallacy is going to say that they're right when they are not right. And that's what the gambler, it's normal. Alright, you want to see it? All you got to do is go in a casino and then watch everybody start gambling however they want to gamble, and then you always have the same thing happening, where you got Johnny over there saying he's right, and then you got Sally over there saying she's right, and you got 100 different theories based on, oh, if you do it like this, you do it, and then you get the whole dilemma of, well, who's wrong, who's right? Because somebody has to be right and someone has to be wrong, or someone has to be more right and someone has to be more wrong. That's more or less the truth behind it, is someone has to be more right and someone has to be more wrong. So now that we've concluded and we understand that our nature of reality is, we fallacize and we misconclude actuality and truth behind truth based on biased opinion and based on basically your own personal ideas and your own personal feelings, because that's how they feel about it. That's so more less than not, most people that try to come at people about, what is the way something is, it's just what they feel the way that it should be. That's what they feel most comfortable about. So they're going to say, oh, well, this is the way you're supposed to do it because it feels most comfortable for me. That's what they are really trying to say, but they won't say that because they don't know how to say that. Because it's easier to basically kind of misinterpret and basically come off the wrong way than it is to make what you're trying to say actually make sense. Okay, so what that means is that we're experiencing the gambler's fallacy 100%. And the reason I can tell you that it has to be 100% is because, remember, one of these answers makes 100% sense and one of these answers doesn't make any sense at all. And what do we know of to where people, do we know of a circumstance or a reality or a normality of where people make sense of things that can't make sense? Yes, that's our reality. People make sense of things that cannot even make sense. So we already know that. We already know that people make sense of things that can't even make sense. There's no way for it to make any fucking sense, but then this person made sense of it. So it's nature. It's 100% nature that somebody's going to make sense of something that can't even make sense. Because it's called the gambler's fallacy, the near miss. Alright? And then now it becomes so much more obvious when you start breaking down the science of the way things are and are not. So we already know that people can make sense of things that can't even make sense. So we should not be surprised that people are making sense of the wrong answer. So that's something that everybody has to accept. You have to accept that people are making sense of the wrong answer. Why are people making sense of the wrong answer? Why do people make sense of the wrong answer? It's because the gambler's fallacy, the near miss, the addiction of getting so close, because they're so close that they think that they're right, that they're addicted. oh, well, I'm right, because look at, if I couldn't have gotten any closer, but that's on their own gambler's fallacies. To what's close to them may not be close to somebody else, and that's the problem. Just because they perceive it to be so close, oh, it's so close, it's so close, that's perceived to them. Not everybody is going to perceive it to fucking be that close. Why do these people that are wrong perceive things to be so close when it's not? Because they're lazy, they don't take their time, and they're senseless. They go off their own feeling. They literally go off their feeling, and they call their own feelings correct. So they need to state that, hey, since I feel like I'm correct, that it's correct. And then if they were to, why don't they say that? Because if they say it like that, people won't accept it. People won't buy it. People will see straight through it. People will be like, now you just admitted that you're basically just taking a shot in the dark. But they won't tell you. They won't tell you, oh, I'm just taking a shot in the dark. I'm just taking a shot in the dark. Because if they just state, oh, I'm just taking a shot in the dark, then everyone's going to be like, well, then you're obviously wrong, because you just said yourself, you're just taking a shot in the dark. So they won't say that. They won't just say, hey, I'm taking a shot in the dark. The gambler's fallacy refuses to put it out there that they have taken a shot in the dark.